So the acronym for chapter 5 was STEP. So how do we stay in this world? Chapter 5 began with Arjuna having a doubt. Again, the same doubt essentially. The same question was asked again, which is it better to renounce or is it better to work in devotion? So somebody had posted a question in WhatsApp yesterday. What is the difference between chapter 3 and chapter 5? Because both do talk about Karma Yoga. But chapter 5 is Karma Yoga in Krishna consciousness. And chapter 3, although the Lord does talk about Karma Yoga, so you have the Sakama Karma Yoga, which is Krishna is not in the formula. However, you are following prescribed rules and regulations as per the Vedic scriptures. But you are doing it primarily for the purposes of sense gratification alone. That is called Sakama Karma Yoga. So you are attached both to the duty as well as to the results. But in that, Krishna is nowhere in the picture. So that is one element of Karma Yoga. The other element of practicing Karma Yoga is what is called Nishkama Karma Yoga. Here, you are more attached to your duties and the results you are not concerned about. Even in Nishkama Karma Yoga, Krishna may or may not be part of the formula. Whereas in chapter 5, which is titled Karma Sannyasa Yoga, which is working with devotion, is also Nishkama Karma Yoga. But if you add Krishna to the equation, it becomes work in Krishna consciousness, and therefore it is considered a karma. So any and all work that you do anyway, if your sole purpose is to satisfy Krishna and to please Krishna and to make him happy, and by making Krishna happy, that is the source of your bliss and happiness. So your happiness is dovetailed to satisfying Krishna. That is Karma Yoga in Krishna consciousness. So chapter 5 is primarily about Karma Yoga and Krishna consciousness, which is non-different than Bhakti Yoga. We discussed yesterday that Bhakti Yoga automatically includes all of the other yogas. In Bhakti Yoga, you're practicing Karma Yoga. In Bhakti Yoga, you're practicing Dhyana Yoga because you understand who the Supreme Lord is. In Bhakti Yoga, you're also practicing meditation, except meditation that is authorized for Kali Yuga, which is Harinam meditation, not the other meditation that was practiced in Satya Yuga. So that is the difference between chapter 3 and chapter 5. Chapter 5 is working in devotion and keeping Krishna in the center and doing everything to please Lord Krishna, which is ultimately, that is what is Bhakti Yoga. So you may enjoy the results of your work. There's nothing wrong with that. But first, your first priority is to please Krishna. And by pleasing Krishna, you also are satisfied. you are also blissful. That's all. It's just a way, it's just a reframing of how you look at things. That's all. Nothing changes in your life. The only thing is you keep adding Krishna, you keep remembering Krishna throughout the day in whatever practical way we can. So, chapter 5 begins with Arjuna asking the same question. So, tell me for sure which is better. Should I work or renounce, or should I work in devotion? Because it appears that you was in one instance you're saying work, in another instance you're saying give it up. I'm a little bit confused. Should I stop or should I start? Which is it? Tell me definitively. That's what Arjuna asks Krishna. So what is better, renunciation or work in devotion? So Krishna is proving from shlokas 2 to 6 in chapter 5 that renunciation and work in devotion are both equal. There is not much of a difference there. How are they equal? Because they are both aimed at liberation. That's how they are equal. But which is superior? Krishna says, work in devotion is superior to renunciation because work in devotion is easier to do for a human being than to renounce. Renunciation is far more difficult to sustain. Then in shloka 7 to 12, Krishna talks about a yoga yukta, which is a person who is practicing nishkama karma yoga. What are his characteristics? So you will notice Prabhupada interchanges nishkama karma yoga with bhakti yoga, which is just adding Krishna to it. So as we discussed, this kind of bhakti yoga encompasses everything, including nishkama karma yoga. So such a person is never entangled. He is aloof from the senses and the sense objects. He is unaffected by sinful reactions. And then Krishna uses an analogy of a lotus leaf. A drop of water on the lotus leaf just easily moves around. So similarly, that lotus leaf is unaffected by that water. And such a person who is working in devotion is actually just working for purifying themselves. That's it. They understand that performing work with devotion itself is a purificatory process. So then in shloka 12, Krishna also talks about if a person is attached or if a person is detached, what are the different results? And Krishna says it is actually greed that entangles us. Detachment is what gives us peace of mind. Then in shlokas 13 to 16, Krishna talks about how the interaction happens between the Jivatma, the Paramatma, and Prakriti. So it's like a triangle. And the culprit in this triangle is Jivatma. How is he the culprit? Because he's the origin of this desire, of his own desires. And he's constantly trying to satisfy his desires. And the Lord sometimes sanctions it and sometimes does not sanction it based on what credits he has already accumulated. And hence, Acharyas say, when it comes to karma, Krishna has nothing to do with it. Whatever we experience in this life, especially the suffering and also, of course, the positive things, is because of what we have done in our past life. Krishna is just checking the balance and allowing you to withdraw. Of course, he determines how much you withdraw. But you are responsible for depositing into that karma tank. Krishna has nothing to do with it. So Krishna says in Shloka 16 that the one who understands how this triangle is interacting, if he understands the truth about this, then his ignorance is destroyed. Then he is properly situated. Because such a person understands that it is his own desires that are causing his endless cycle of problems and nothing else. So if our desire changes simply to please Krishna, then the entire equation changes. Nothing is getting deposited in that karma tank or that bank account. That's all. It's as simple as that. If your desire to please yourself is replaced with a desire to satisfy and please Guru and Krishna, then your life is sublime. Then you can experience Vaikuntha here. You don't have to physically go into the spiritual world. That's what Krishna says. You can experience bliss here and now. It's just a matter of change in perspective and application based on this knowledge. Practice. So in Shloka 17 to 21, Krishna talks about the symptoms of such a self-realized person. Krishna says such a person no longer has any misgivings. He's cleansed of his misgivings. He doesn't blame others or God for his problems. He understands that he was the cause, either in this life or in his previous life. Such a person sees with equal vision everybody, all species, all inanimate and animate objects. He doesn't separate them from Krishna. He sees them all as Krishna's energies. And because of this, Krishna says, he's already conquered life and death, birth and death. Because he's situated in the right platform. He is already situated in transcendence. That's what Krishna says in Shlokas 20 and 21. And because he is already situated in transcendence, he is enjoying unlimited happiness because he is forever concentrating on the Supreme Lord. He is always thinking, how can I please my dear Lord? So then in Shlokas 22 to 25, why is the person still stuck with problems then? If we've understood this, why are some of us still stuck with this cycle? So Krishna says the first thing we need to learn to do is to tolerate. Tolerate what? All the urges that are shaping via the senses through the mind. First, we need to tolerate our urges. Remember that other analogy in chapter 2 where Krishna says, the rivers will keep flowing into the ocean, but the ocean stays calm. It doesn't breach its boundaries. So similarly, desires will keep coming into your mind through your senses. But your mind should control itself. So till how long should we tolerate? Till our last breath. Because our desires will always be there. The baser desires will always be there. There will always be temptations. So until our last breath, we have to be so vigilant. Try to make sure we don't come under the control of our desires, the baser desires. And in Shloka 24, Krishna says, he acknowledges, he says it's very difficult to control your urges. But he says it can be done if you are seeking pleasure within yourself and not in objects external to you. Objects means not just material objects, it includes other jivatmas. Sometimes we vest all of our happiness in a relationship. That is also an object of your happiness. Krishna is saying, don't search for happiness outside of you, because it doesn't exist outside of you. The best way to control your urges is to focus on being self-satisfied. And the only way you can be self-satisfied is when you begin to transform yourself as a human being. So Krishna says, such a person who is seeking pleasure from within, he can control his urges easily. Such a person, Krishna says, is already liberated in this life. He doesn't have to go to Vaikuntha to be liberated. He is already experiencing bliss in this life. And ultimately, he will go back to the spiritual world. So in shlokas 25 and 26, Krishna talks about the other symptoms of such a self-realized soul. Very important instruction for us. Although we are not self-realized, we discussed this yesterday. It is very clear none of us are self-realized. If we are self-realized, we don't need to be attending Bhagavad Gita classes. So we're trying to learn what it is that the Lord is saying and trying to understand it and trying in some small way, helplessly we are trying to follow the instructions. We feel helpless. We're not strong. We don't have self-control. But in shlokas 25 and 26, Krishna, I hope all of you have read the English translation of the shlokas. Krishna is saying the symptoms of a self-realized soul is that he is self-disciplined. Krishna doesn't say be self-disciplined to please me. When you focus within, the first thing you do is look at your lack of discipline and try to address that. Because you know that's where the problem is. Lack of discipline. So such a person who's self-realized, he is not only self-disciplined, Krishna says he is constantly endeavoring for perfection. Again, Krishna is not saying be perfect for me. But a person who is focused on understanding who he is, understands his imperfections and begins to correct them. Krishna is using the word constantly. You don't give up. Constantly endeavoring for perfection. That's what a devotee should be doing. We should practice self-discipline. We should constantly endeavor for perfection in everything that we do, both for Krishna and for whatever materialistic activities we have to perform, because we are here in this world. Krishna says such a person who focuses on self-discipline and who is constantly endeavoring for perfection, he will attain the ultimate destination. He will be successful. Now you may think, okay, good Lord, these qualities are lofty aspirations. How can we do that? How can we accomplish it? Because we are ignorant, we are weak. But Krishna says, if we are sincere, if we are serious in our endeavor, Krishna says, surely you will achieve that ultimate destination. So, to practice this self-discipline and perfection, we must be sincere and serious to achieve the ultimate goal. And then Krishna finally concludes the chapter by talking about the peace formula. So if we really want world peace, every Jivatma, first of all, needs to acknowledge that there is a Supreme Lord. He controls the entire universe. He is the person who enjoys your yajna and your tapa, your sacrifices and your austerities that you're performing. Bhoktaram. Hare Krishna. Please stay on mute. So this is the peace formula. First of all, knowing that Krishna is the ultimate beneficiary of your yajnas and your austerities. He says he is the supreme lord of all the planets and of all the demigods. All 33 crore demigods are his dutiful servants. Just like a corporation has many departments, the government has many departments, many ministries with different portfolios. So all of the demigods have their different portfolios. Please understand, none of us is worshipping 33 crore demigods. We don't even know who they are. We are only worshipping those demigods that we are familiar with or has been talked about in the Shastras. So questions like, why have we given up worship of Indra or whoever, is an insignificant question in that if we really were worried about worshipping the demigods, we would be worshipping all 33 crore of them. We are exclusively focusing on those demigods that provide you certain benefits. But there are so many demigods. Shastras say for you to open your eyes, there is a demigod. For you to blink, there is a demigod for that. For you to pass urine and pass stool, there is a demigod for that. Are we worshipping all of them? No. We are only worshipping demigods out of selfishness to acquire our material desires. Krishna is saying all these demigods are my servants, including Lord Sadashiva. So he is the supreme lord of all the planets and of all the demigods. And then Krishna says, I am your real friend and I am your well-wisher. Suhridam sarva bhutanam. And Krishna concludes by using the words Shantim Richati. What is the Shantim Richati? Those who understand that he's the beneficiary of all of the yajnas and sacrifices, those who understand that he is the supreme lord of all the planetary systems and the demigods are his servants, those who understand and accept that he is your best friend and well-wisher, such a person will experience eternal peace and satisfaction. So this is actually the simple peace formula that Krishna talks about in chapter 5. So now let us look at chapter 6. So in chapter 5, in shlokas 27 and 28, Krishna one second, I think I'm on the wrong slide. Krishna talks about he gives a summary of Ashtang Yoga. He talks about various kinds of yogas, and as part of that, he introduces the topic of Ashtang Yoga. So chapter 6 is titled Dhyana Yoga, meditation. So the single word summary for today could be meditation or thinking. What is it that you should keep thinking about to achieve that result of peace? Shantim Richati. So this entire chapter 6 is exclusively a description of Dhyana Yoga. Meditation as it was practiced in Satya Yoga. This kind of meditation is not prescribed for any other yogas. It is meant to be practiced only in Satya Yoga, because after you read this chapter, you'll understand why it is impossible to practice in Kali Yuga, and it is impractical also to practice this in Kali Yuga. So here, Krishna begins to talk about what are the various angas of the yoga, Ashtang, 8. What is the process? Then he talks about the 2 stages. The beginning stage when you're practicing this yoga, and then the stage of perfection. And Krishna concludes this chapter by talking about the topmost yogi. So I'd like to dedicate my humble obeisances to His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhakti Vedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. So today we're going to talk about how the mind is the source of all of our agitation and suffering. How the mind can be your friend or it can be your enemy. The choice is yours. Then we get into the details of Ashtang Yoga. Then Arjuna asks a very, very important question. What happens to those who start down any of these paths of any of this yoga? What if they fail? What if they give up? What happens to them? And then finally, Krishna talks about the various yogis, who is superior among the yogis, and finally he will conclude the chapter with talking about his bhakta, his devotee. So the acronym for today is EASY, enemy or friend, Ashtanga Yoga, success and failure, and who's a real yogi. So let's look at the shloka 6. Shloka 6. Bandhuratmatmanastasya yenatmaivatmana jitah anatmanastu shatrutve vartetatmaiva shatruvat. So Krishna is saying, for that person who has conquered the mind, for him who has conquered the mind is the best of friends. But for one who has failed to do so, his mind will remain the greatest enemy. So then Krishna talks about when is your mind your friend and when is your mind your enemy. When your mind follows your direction, when it is progressive and makes healthy choices, when it is detached from sense gratification. Because you see, sense gratification causes agitation. Because you're constantly on the edge. It's like because you're always in anticipation of the outcome. Will I get it? Will I get it? Or what if something goes wrong? So if your mind is detached from the sense objects, then your mind can be your friend. And Krishna says, if you learn to control your mind, then the result is freedom from anxiety and elevation to the transcendental platform. Because through this you are experiencing bliss. However, when our mind becomes our enemy, what happens? We have a tendency to allow lust, anger, greed to overtake us. What happens as a result? We get irritated, we get agitated. Sometimes we are misguided to take the wrong actions. And this happens because you're attached to your desires. You waste so much time, energy, and interest in your desires that it causes a lot of dissonance in you. And what's the outcome as a result of this? Krishna says entanglement. It's like you tightly wind yourself up, and pretty soon you're not able to extricate yourself out of the situation. And it leads to degradation. Definitely, you're not on the transcendental platform. You're going closer and closer towards the other direction, the opposite direction. So this is the difference between having your mind as a friend or allowing your mind to become your enemy. And again, everything comes back to desires, material desires, sensory gratification, doing everything to please yourself, thinking I'll be happy doing this, I'll be happy doing that, like that. So this is just an analogy. This does not mean Krishna or Arjuna here. This picture is just used as an analogy. Okay. So the horses are your senses. They are always moving in different directions, you see. They're always observing various sense objects and getting attracted to various things. So it's like the horses are not being controlled. If there are 5 horses, they're moving in 5 different directions. Your 5 senses moving in 5 different directions. They're pulling you in different directions. The mind are the reins that you use to control your senses. In this case, the horses are controlled by the reins. But who is operating the reins? Your intelligence is used to control your mind. The chariot exemplifies this body. And the person operating the chariot exemplifies or represents us as the self, the ego. So you have the senses, the mind, the intelligence, and the ego. And you're experiencing all of this in this physical body. So somebody asked a question yesterday, I think posted on WhatsApp. There is a misunderstanding in that question itself. If karma is performed on the bodily platform, why does the soul have to suffer for it? That was the question.
Hare Krishna. Ji Mataji.
Yeah.
This was the question.
Yeah, I'll address your question.
Thank you.
The body cannot act without the soul. If the soul is not in the body is useless. So one cannot artificially separate the body from the soul. The soul occupies this body and acts through the body. So it's the false ego that is separated from Krishna that acts in contradiction to Krishna's injunctions. Because the soul gets contaminated, the soul has to experience the impact and results of karma. It has nothing to do with the body. The body is just a machine, right? If you're a driver of a car, you can drive it smoothly or you can drive it roughly. That is your choice. The choice being made by the driver who's controlling the machinery. So the false ego has occupied this body and trying to control it imperfectly. So karma, although the soul in its original position is pure, because of contamination, It is contaminated. The consciousness, remember we said the symptom of the soul is consciousness. When your consciousness is contaminated, you experience the results of karma. Who is the you? The soul. So it has nothing to do with the body. The body is just a vehicle that's experiencing the results of your desires. So now we come to the Ashtang Yoga section. So there are 8 limbs. But what is yoga actually? Yoga means union with the Lord. So in this chapter, Lord is giving an alternative through which you can approach him. He's talked about karma yoga. He's talked about jnana yoga as ways to achieve him finally. And now he's going to talk about Ashtanga Yoga. So from work is worship to work with devotion. Now meditate. So what is yoga? I think at least in today's world, there is just practicing asanas is considered yoga. That is not yoga. That's just one element of yoga. Asanas is just one aspect of the yoga. So is it an austerity? What is it? Is it a health fitness outcome? Is it a paranormal thing? So Krishna will establish for us what is actually yoga, Ashtanga Yoga. Of course, today you have yoga for everything. Yoga in office. These days, a lot of corporations are doing desk yoga, chair yoga, yoga for your pets. Anything and everything, they attach the word yoga and sell it. No? Yoga to reduce your blood pressure, business yoga, yoga for mothers. Of course, there are benefits to practicing yoga, no doubt. You do have physical benefits, but this is not yoga by itself. This is yoga. This is the 8-fold path that is called Ashtanga Yoga. Ashtanga means 8 limbs. So this in totality is yoga. How does this begin? Yam and niyam. Even before you practice the asana, even before you practice the exercises, you are supposed to do something else first. But most of us don't do it. You have to practice certain do's and don'ts. The number of hours you sleep, how much you eat, what you eat. So there are a lot of do's and don'ts before you can even come to asana. But today, everybody is teaching asanas without any adherence to do's and don'ts. So the results will not be perfect. So this is the actual process of yoga. You first need to understand what are the regulations, do's and don'ts. What can you eat, what you shouldn't eat? How much should you sleep? What should be your conduct? You should control your senses. Then you begin to practice asana. And as you begin to practice your asana, you focus on pranayama, your breathing. You regulate your breathing. So I mentioned that Krishna talks in shlokas 2 to 4, 2 levels of Ashtanga Yoga. One is called the Yoga Rurukshuhu. Yoga Rurukshuhu means someone who is a beginner. And then the second level is a person called the Yoga Ruda. He is practicing yoga in an advanced stage. So the Yoga Rurukshuhu, the neophyte learning to practice Ashtanga Yoga, is practicing Yam, Niyam, Asana, Pranayam, and Pratyahara. These are the 5 things that the neophyte yogi is beginning to practice. Pratyahara means withdrawing your senses from the external world. You are now focusing. Krishna talks about how you begin your practice. Your eyesight should be on the tip of your nose and should not deviate as you're trying to withdraw your senses, and then ultimately you're practicing dharana, dhyana, and samadhi. So this dharana, dhyana, and samadhi is the advanced stage of yoga, which is the Yoga Ruda. Someone who is a true yogi has reached that stage of concentration, meditative absorption of the Vishnu form. They're focusing on 2 things. So one is they are focusing on themselves. Simultaneously, after they have understood their self, then they focus on Paramatma. So there are 2 levels of realization there also. They realize who they are, and then they realize that qualitatively they are non-different than the Supreme. That is Samadhi. So these are the 8-fold yoga process that Krishna talks about in this chapter 6. So Krishna has already talked about the mind. So we'll just quickly review this. So there are do's and there are don'ts, which is yam and niyam. There are asanas, sitting postures to control the body. Pranayam, to learn how to control your breath. Pratyahara, to withdraw your senses. Dharana, to control your mind. Dhyana, you begin your meditation on Vishnu. And samadhi, final trance, complete absorption in Vishnu. Can anyone do yoga? We have a photograph of a little kitten doing yoga. So Krishna also tells in this chapter who can practice yoga. This Ashtanga Yoga we're talking about. This Ashtanga Yoga can be practiced by someone whose mind is not agitated, who has no material desires, who is practicing strict celibacy. And Krishna gives an analogy, like a lamp in a windless place, the flame doesn't flicker. This is the kind of person that can practice yoga, who has regulated his habits of sleep, eat, recreation. Krishna talks about sleeping, eating, and recreation. What kind of habits does this person have? Such a person can practice Ashtanga Yoga. Mind must be calm. You should have no material desires. You should practice celibacy. You should regulate all your habits. You should be like a lamp in a windless place. That's what Krishna says. After hearing all of this, Arjuna says, are you kidding me? I can't do this. Arjuna said, oh Madhusudana, the system of yoga which you have summarized appears impractical and unendurable to me. And then he says, why? Because my mind is restless and unsteady. How can a person with a restless mind and unsteady mind ever hope to practice yoga? Arjuna is protesting. Very nice of you to explain all of this yoga in detail. When Arjuna says, Krishna, I don't think I can do this. And anyway, who can do this? Whatever you've spoken about until now is so impractical. Krishna says, go to a secluded place. Krishna says, make an asana for yourself. It should be not too high, it should not be too low. Krishna says, lay a whatever, deer skin. And on top of that, put a soft cloth. And on top of that, put a kusha grass. Make sure wherever you're practicing this yoga is a holy place. Sit straight, Krishna says. Your back should be erect. Your eyesight should be on the tip of the nose, not closed and falling asleep. Hearing all of this, Arjuna says, I don't think I can do this. Who can do this? He says, Chanchalam hi manah Krishna. Chanchalam, the mind is restless, Krishna. How can we do this yoga? So Arjuna is protesting. This yoga practice that you're talking about is impossible. Chanchalam hi manah Krishna pramati palavadridam tasyaham nigraham manye vayor iva sudushkaram. Arjuna is saying, the mind is restless, it's turbulent, it's always filled with so many thoughts, uncontrolled. They say in a day that your mind goes through 80,000 thoughts in a day. That's how many thoughts are impinging on your mind constantly. Arjuna is saying, the mind is restless, Krishna. It's turbulent. It is obstinate. It's very strong, O Krishna. And to subdue it, I think, is more difficult than controlling the wind. So Arjuna is giving the reason why he thinks one cannot practice this kind of yoga. Because it's very difficult to control the mind. Subduing the mind is more difficult, Arjuna says. I think I can subdue the wind faster than I can subdue my mind. So then what does Krishna say? So this is the nature of our mind, you see. It is always flickering. 1 minute it says yes, next minute it will say no. Any decision that you take, you're just filled with, should I do this or not? So many doubts you have. Those doubts arise because of your attachments. So rationality goes out the window. You are actually trying to rationalize all of your various attachments. You're trying to justify it. And once, some of us at least will experience this, or most of us would have experienced it at some point in life or the other. Sometimes the mind gets attached to one thought and is not able to let go. This especially happens when we get into an argument or you feel that somebody has insulted you. You cannot forget it. For days on end, you are thinking about it. The mind is turbulent. It goes here and there. It doesn't even ask for permission. It just breaks barriers for the wrong reasons. So after Arjuna protests, Krishna says how you can control the mind. One is by practice. Shri Bhagavan Uvacha Asamshayam Mahabaho Mano Durnigraham Chalam Abhyasena tu Kaunteya Vairagyena cha Grahyate. Krishna says two things will happen. O mighty armed son of Kunti, it is undoubtedly very difficult to curb the restless mind, but it is possible by suitable practice and by detachment. Abhyasa and Vairagya. Two things that are necessary for all of us to learn how to control the mind. Practice. Practice what, you can ask? What am I supposed to practice? Practice spirituality. And as you practice spirituality, your detachment towards outcomes will increase. And through this, you can experience true peace of mind. And that is what we are calling bliss. When we're serving Krishna, it is blissful. So this is a simple process Krishna is saying. Practice, and practice will lead eventually to detachment. Abhyasa and Vairagya. Practice. What should we practice? There are 9 processes of bhakti, and it begins with hearing. Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu Smaranam, Archanam, Vandanam, Dasyam, Padasevanam. So you can begin your practice by hearing. Hearing what? Hearing Krishna Katha, hearing Bhagavad Gita, hearing Bhagavatam, hearing Chaitanya Charitamrita, hearing about the pastimes of the Lord and his devotees. Kirtanam Vishnu. You should do Kirtan on Lord Vishnu. How do you do Kirtan? There are 2 ways to do Kirtan. One way of doing Kirtan is Japa. Japa is when you are individually meditating on the names of the Lord by chanting the names of Lord Hari. And then Sankirtan means doing it together in a group, chanting together. Smaranam, always thinking about Krishna. Archanam, worshipping the Lord. Vandanam, offering your sincere prayers to the Lord. Lord, please help me practice spirituality because I am so weak. I cannot do this by myself. I need your help. Being a servant of Krishna, Dasya. Sakyam, being a friend. Doing parikrama of the temple or going to holy places and visiting them until you finally surrender. Atma Nivedan. So these are the 9 ways in which one can begin to control the mind. Abhyasena. But the most important of these practices is hearing and chanting. Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu. These 2 things are very important for us. That is, if we are interested in conquering our own demons within. And over a period of time, you will give up activities that has nothing to do with the Lord. In the sense, you will get more and more entangled in all the right ways in service of Krishna. Kulashekar Alvar talks about in his Mukundamala Stotra, his wonderful prayers that Prabhupada has written purports about. And Prabhupada frequently quoted Kulashekar Alvar. Frequently he would quote him. One of the prayers by Kulashekar, he was one of the great kings actually, who was also considered one of the Alvars, worshippers of Lord Vishnu. He says, I don't want to wait till I get old to come back to you. Because when I am old and I'm leaving my breath, so many thoughts will be in my mind. I will not be able to focus on you. I will have this vata kapha, phlegm in my chest. And then he gives a beautiful analogy. He says, I just want to be a swan that dives under the water and entangles its beaks within the stem of the lotus plant. He says, I want to do the same thing. Just entangle myself like a swan tries to entangle itself within the water, trying to search for the stem of the lotus plant. So similarly, we should entangle ourselves in the seva of the Lord if we want to achieve vairagya. But vairagya doesn't mean giving up your family. Vairagya doesn't mean giving up your relationships. Vairagya simply means you understand that all of this is temporary and you learn to tolerate the ups and downs. Vairagya does not mean hatred for society. Vairagya doesn't mean you want to run away. Vairagya means you simply are able to distinguish between what is important and what is unimportant for you. You are singularly focused on devotional service to the Lord. That is actually what ultimately gives you the bliss that we are all searching for. Success and failure. So Arjuna asks a very important question. He says, you know, the yoga that you've described is impossible. But Arjuna asks a question. He says, what happens to those yogis, any one of them? The one practicing karma yoga, the one practicing jnana yoga, the one practicing dhyana yoga, the one practicing bhakti yoga also. What happens if they don't succeed in this life? What happens if they give up halfway through? Something may come in our lives that may prevent us from practicing. Something may happen in our lives that may take us away from Krishna. And Arjuna asks, what happens to such individuals? And he uses an analogy. Are they like the cloud? The cloud just disappears because of the wind. It just gets carried away and dissipates. Is everything that they did, is it like a cloud driven by the winds? Is Arjuna asking. Is it of no use? They have practiced so hard, but they were not successful. Does that mean all of that effort was a waste? Because they didn't succeed in this life? That is his concern. Krishna reassures him in this shloka. What happens to those yogis who could not become successful? Prapya punya kratan lokan ushitva shashvati samaha suchinam shrimatam gehe yoga brashto vijayate. So Krishna says, the unsuccessful yogi, after many, many years of enjoyment on the planets of the pious living entities, is born into a family of righteous people or into a family of rich aristocracy. So those who are practicing any one of these yoga paths, but they practiced it for a short duration, what is the result for them? Because they sincerely practiced it for a short duration, Krishna says, first thing that will happen is they will go to the heavenly planets to enjoy themselves. See, in heavenly planets, you have a much longer life. You have much more wealth and enjoyment there. What is the result of such an unsuccessful yogi who has practiced it for a brief period of time? Well, you go to the heavenly planets to enjoy yourself. Well, what happens after you're done enjoying yourself in the heavenly planets? Then you will come back into the middle planetary system, and Krishna says, you will take birth in one of the two families, Suchinam, in a family of righteous people, or Srimatam, you will be born in a family of wealth. And from there, you will pick up where you left off in your previous life. You will continue to practice. See, unlike in the material world, when you're done with this body and when you occupy the next body, assume you come back into the human form. You have to go to kindergarten all over again and learn ABCD all over again and work very, very hard until you get your degree. But in spiritual life, it's not like that. If you're unsuccessful in this life, Krishna says in your next life, you'll pick up where you left off. If you finish second grade in your spiritual life, next life when you take birth, you will pick up third grade. You don't have to start from the beginning. You see how merciful Krishna is? So like this, Krishna says, ultimately you will reach me by perfection. Every life I give you an opportunity to perfect yourself if you're unable to do it in this life. But none of us want to take that risk. We want to exit in this life. We don't want to take the risk of coming back. And then Krishna concludes by comparing the different yogis. Who is the best among the yogis? A yogi is greater than an ascetic, greater than the empiricist, and greater than the fruitive worker. Therefore, O Arjuna, in all circumstances, be a yogi. That's what Krishna is instructing Arjuna. Whatever it is, even though you are a Kshatriya, you can still practice one of the yoga forms, Karma Yoga, Jnana Yoga, or Dhyana Yoga. Among these three, Krishna is saying, those who are practicing Dhyana Yoga are superior. Because obviously it's a ladder, right? Karma Yoga at the bottom, Jnana Yoga, then Dhyana Yoga, and finally Bhakti Yoga. But among these three, the one practicing Dhyana Yoga is far greater than the one practicing studying the Vedas, than the one practicing just karma. And Krishna tells Arjuna, whatever happens, you practice one of these yoga paths, or all three. So this is the ladder again we're looking at. Ultimately, you have to culminate in Bhakti Yoga. Hence, we say Bhakti Yoga includes Dhyana Yoga, it includes Jnana Yoga, it includes Karma. It's a ladder to reach Krishna. So our ultimate destination is to practice Krishna consciousness. And then the very last shloka, Krishna talks about his devotees. Yoginam api sarvesham madgatena antaratmana shraddhavan bhajate yomam same yuktatamo mataha. Krishna concludes by saying, and of all the yogis, the one with great faith who always abides in me, thinks of me within himself, and renders transcendental, loving service to me. He is the most intimately united with me in yoga and is the highest of all. That is my opinion. So Krishna says, those who are my devotees, they're always trying to serve me. They always engage in service. They're always thinking of me by chanting my names. They're always offering some seva to me in the temple or to the other devotees or to Guru. He's saying, these devotees, I have the most intimate relationship with them. And they are the topmost. He says, that is my opinion. So with this sets the stage for the next 6 chapters of the Bhagavad Gita, which is Bhakti Yoga. So Bhakti Yoga is all about the Lord and his devotees. So what can we expect? In chapter 7, hearing is important. Listening and hearing about Krishna is important. Krishna talks about how he's everywhere. He's the essence of everything. He's our ultimate goal. We can accept or reject this knowledge. And then Krishna talks about demigod worship. Who worships the demigods and why? But Krishna also says those who are his devotees need not worship the demigods. And the answer to that is also, we will see tomorrow. So this concludes Chapter 6, Dhyana Yoga. The single word summary for today is thinking, dhyana or meditation. What is it that you should think about to achieve the ultimate objective, which is Krishna? So the first 6 chapters were all about the Jivatma, who they are, what is their duties and responsibilities, what is their ultimate objective, how can they achieve that objective either through Karma Yoga, through Dhyana Yoga, or Jnana Yoga. And then Krishna introduces the topic of Bhakti Yoga at the end of Chapter 6, setting the stage to talk more about himself and in relation to him, his devotees. So we will stop here for the day. Mancha kalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhya evacha